All right, so we will kick things off here. It is just 12:30. I did see a quick question in the chat. All of the attendees will remain muted. We are in webinar mode, so all the attendees should remain muted. You don't have to worry about that. That was one of the questions. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining another Industry Insider webinar series brought to you through the Office of Alumni Engagement at the college. My name is Pam Persichetti, and I'm a member of the Alumni Engagement team. So thank you for taking some time out and joining us for our Publishing Your First Book webinar with Bryan Kuderna. We're excited to have him. And I'll just jump right into introducing him a little bit and then turn it over to Bryan, and he has a great presentation for us. So Bryan graduated from the School of Business in 2009 with a degree in finance. He is a certified financial planner by day and the founder of the Kuderna Financial Team, which began in 2014. He's spoken as a special guest on financial literacy nationwide to many universities, hospitals, government offices, and he also hosts a podcast called the Kuderna Podcast. So more topically for today's webinar, he has also published 2 books. The first, Millennial Millionaire, a financial literacy book, which was published in 2016. And most recently, Anoroc, a fictional fantasy novel, which he just published this past year. So as I said, he has a varied background, got his degree in finance, and obviously that lends itself to his first book, but also published a fantasy novel, so fictional fantasy. So he is here to talk about that with us today and take us through all the steps from, starting with your thoughts all the way to publishing and marketing. So I know we have a great crowd. We had a lot of interest in this. I have a sneaking suspicion everyone living through a pandemic for the past year probably brought out the author in them. And I certainly saw that in the response to today's webinar. So Bryan, thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Pam. So good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here on the webinar, and I look forward to sharing a little bit of my experiences as an author. And I'll kind of take you through a crash course of the ups and downs. I'm sure anyone on the call today that's made an attempt or is an author realizes there can be some trials and tribulations along the way. So we'll go over a little bit of that and some tips that I have, and then I'd be happy to open it up for questions as well. But first things first, let me share my screen here so that we can introduce a little presentation for everybody.
And Bryan, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned to our audience, if you do have questions, please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat, and Bryan and I will address those at the conclusion.
Yep, yeah, without a doubt. So just getting started here, a little bit about myself as well and how I really got into writing. So I was actually our sports editor for our high school paper way back when in high school at Ocean Township High School. And then fast forward a couple of years at TCNJ, I was the business editor for the Signal, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So I always had that passion for writing. I just didn't really know how you could make a career out of it and kind of live the life that you may want, financially and so forth. So that's obviously why I pursued a career in finance and starting my own business as a financial advisor. But that passion for writing that never left. And I always, knew that there would be a way I could weave that both into my business, but also into, my personal life as well. So that's a little bit of kind of how I kept that flame burning. But just to get started, so I always tell people it all begins with an idea, all right? The greatest books, the greatest stories ever told at one point were just a thought and nothing more than that. So the first one that we can talk about is Millennial Millionaire, which I'll share up here, okay? That came out in 2016, and I started writing that book in 2013. So I was just at that point out of college for about 4 years. And, I was kind of going on my way, working like crazy, trying to build my practice in finance. But along the way, I had a lot of stories from clients, other peers, other professionals I worked with that were really eye-opening. And I saw a big gap in financial literacy for millennials and the upcoming generation. So I started to think, kind of taking a step back from the day-to-day grind, and thought, there's a great story to tell here that not only would kind of fulfill my passion for writing, but I could also fold it into my business and make it a bit of a marketing piece. So I knew that my first book, if there ever was one, would be in that vein where it would be nonfiction and something that could serve multiple purposes of financial literacy, but also marketing. So in 2013, what I did, I had all these stories, these things in mind. I downloaded an app on my iPad called Dictation. And so whenever I had some creative idea or some crazy story from work that day, I would just grab my iPad, tap the button, and you'd start speaking into it, and it would record everything you're saying. And so I would do that, day after day, week after week, with just all these different ideas or stories or bits of news that were on my mind. And then after probably about 6 months to a year, I had several pages on Dragon, and that essentially became my outline. So from there, what I did is I started to take all these different notes and group them together on what I thought could be common themes and eventually chapters. And so we fast forward a little further. Once I opened up Word and started typing, I had at that point about 15 or 16 chapters ready to go, with rough ideas that I knew I could expand upon quite a bit. And so it was kind of like plug and play from there. And that is ultimately what became my draft for Millennial Millionaire. Okay. And then from there, I had to submit that through compliance, being securities licensed and so forth. That was another like 3-month process of our compliance office kind of tearing through it, making sure everything sounded okay, editing things as we went. And then eventually I was able to release that book in 2016. All right. So that was a book that did have a firm outline. And I think that that was much easier in some respects, that, you were able to kind of have it all ready for you, almost like a starter kit, and then to begin writing. Now we fast forward a little bit further. In December of 2018, that's where the idea for Anoroc came about, which that's this book right here. Okay, that's my new release. Also, you could see you have these little stickers autographed by author. Anybody that's coming out with a book, they're great to slap on a book, and I think people really kind of gravitate towards that when they see something autographed. So I think it gives it a little more staying power, just as a little sidebar. But anyways, in 2018, I had started getting into fiction as a reader, which I never really did growing up. I always liked reading about leaders, famous athletes, politicians, war heroes, a lot of biographies. So I was always a nonfiction guy. But as time went on and I started to appreciate a little bit more some of the fictional world, that's what I thought could be a great way to tell a story in my next book. And as my business had become more established, I knew that I could really take some time to allocate to more of a passion project. And that's where Anoroc came about. So again, I started writing that December of 2018. It was just a simple idea, kind of combining thoughts from Harry Potter, of these kids coming of age and growing together. Also with Star Wars, you notice the main characters there, the Chiggities, are these creatures. Are almost a little bit like Ewoks. Somebody could compare them in a sense. So that's where I started to kind of fold together a lot of these ideas as far as what the world could look like. And I did not use an outline for that. So this was very different, where I had a grandiose idea of a boy and his brother, 2 teenagers coming of age on this planet where I could let my imagination run wild. And then what I started to do is, when I'd have a good idea that kind of came to mind, instead of using Dragon, I would just go on my iPhone and I'd go into the notes section and I would just punch it in there, whether it was the name, a great name for a character, or an attribute that I wanted to add to, the village they're living in or what's going on in the mountains. And whenever those thoughts would come to me, I wouldn't let them escape. I would just jot that into my iPhone. And then the next day when I sat down to write, I would make sure that I'd start incorporating that. So that became kind of like a whole running list of to-do items that would get thrown into the book. And now it was much harder without an outline this time around, but I like the free-flowing nature of writing this. And eventually, when I worked with my editors and everything, they created a calendar, which anyone doing fiction out there, I think that this is a great idea, where you have a calendar of all the major events of that story, all the character introductions, all of the places that we introduce, so that as time goes on, when you look back at your draft, it's not just kind of a mishmash of concepts or stories. It becomes more of a flowing plot line that can follow that calendar. So if you don't have an outline, I think the calendar is very effective. And then lastly, again, from kind of the bird's eye view of author life, is when to write. So I get this question all the time, and I always tell people whenever you can. Okay. So I've met many, many people that they wanted to write a book, they wanted to write an article or even an essay, and they wait to the next day, they wait to next week, they wait to next month, and life just goes on. And unfortunately, then we never get that article that we thought could have been so great. So I would just encourage anybody that has that passion just to sit down and start with one paragraph or with one page and get the juices flowing, and then take it from there. So as far as the particular hours of writing, initially I started to try and write in the morning. But as many authors will attest to, sometimes you sit down and the words just flow. Other times you sit down and you stare at the computer screen for an hour and you're like, man, I can't even write a sentence. And then once you get that rhythm, you just want to go. And so when I would wake up and it would be 6 a.m. and I'd say, okay, I'm going to write today, I would have days like that where I didn't really start to get that rhythm until maybe 7:30. And then I knew for work, I would have to hop on a call or something like that just 20 minutes later. And so it wasn't conducive to really getting all that writing energy out on paper. So long story short, I began to write much more at night, where sometimes I wasn't sitting down till maybe 10:30 at night. And oftentimes, especially with Anoroc, there were nights where I found myself writing till 2 or 3 in the morning, just because I got that energy, I got that flow, and I just had idea after idea, and I didn't want to stop that or lose that momentum. So you can write whenever works for you, but I think you need that free, uninterrupted time. And eventually I found that best in the evenings and sometimes on Friday when I really wrapped up my work week and I could just isolate for maybe 2 or 3 hours. Okay. And then as far as building a team, I don't think anything is ever, anything great is ever done in isolation. So on the first book that I wrote, Millennial Millionaire, I was fortunate enough to have a mentor. There was an accountant that I did a lot of business with, Tom Corley is his name, and he had wrote a series of books called Rich Habits that did really well. So I was able to constantly pick his brain through the process of, some of my story ideas for Millennial Millionaire, what the title could be. It was initially kind of like I didn't have a title. Then I had a very boring title of just, young people's money. Then we had Millennial Millionaire, which a lot of people liked. And now there's a lot of other books with the same exact name, which we'll talk about. But anyways, I had a mentor and he taught me a lot about marketing as well, which is probably about 90% of the battle, which I'll get into in a moment. So I'd encourage you to find a mentor as well. And if you don't know where to look, on Facebook, you can find a group for just about anything, whether it's aspiring authors, financial literacy, fantasy novels, just Harry Potter groups, whatever it could be, you could find it on Facebook. And that's where I was able to build a little bit of a community in which we were able to help one another and say, hey, how did you guys handle transitioning to this chapter? And then the next day I have 30 different comments from other authors on, maybe a similar issue that they had. So certainly take advantage of the social network that's out there. The next thing I wanted to mention is a site called Upwork. And so Upwork, if anyone's not familiar with it, is a site for pretty much all things freelance and all contractors out there. Whether you're trying to put a roof on your house or you're trying to find someone to cater a dinner for your household, you name it, it can be found on Upwork, but also in the professional services. So what I did when I created Anoroc, I knew that I really wanted to fine tune it. So I went on there and the first thing I did was just request beta readers. So beta readers are people who essentially just want to try out your book or your story and give you some feedback. So it's nothing concrete. It's just like fans reading a book and telling you what they think of it. So I posted that up there and said, hey, I'll give you $5 if you can just be a beta reader. And I probably had like 40 bids within the following day. And a lot of them, I just asked them, would you be okay if I sent you a copy? And they said, yeah, I want to do it for free. I just love the genre. I'd be open to reading it. Maybe you could throw my name in the book, et cetera, in the acknowledgments. And that's where I was able to get a lot of beta readers. Eventually, I was able to get a good editor who was a creative writing professor that lost their job in the pandemic and said, I just want to edit your book. I could do it for $50. And I said, okay, can't beat that. And that gave a really good soft edit of what was kind of my final draft at that point. Then eventually I hired a professional editor, again through Upwork, to finalize all the details of Anoroc and helped me create that calendar that I mentioned a moment ago. Okay. And then finally, the illustrator, which you can see some of the drafts here for our cover, was also found on Upwork. So he was a creative design guy, did some really cool work for what became my cover. And lastly, as you're doing all this, I would say don't be shy. I know a lot of people are very scared of what the world will think of, of your book. This is kind of like your baby that you've been grooming. And I totally get that. But then you may miss out on a great mentor that wants to lead you, or you might miss out on opportunities to market your book launch because you've been hiding it for the past few years. So I've made some mistakes in that regard, but definitely if you can start early and often, you can never market enough. Okay. And then a few more things here, because I know we do want to open it for questions, but something that a lot of people ask me is, do you self-publish or do you work with one of the major publishing houses? So on the first book, Millennial Millionaire, okay, which was, of course, nonfiction, it was more of a financial and business guide for young professionals. I did interview with many literary agents. So there's sites that you can go onto and just contact, agents. And so I sent out my manuscript, and I had two that said they were interested and wanted to team up. I worked with one lady for about 4 months on trying to find a commercial publisher for Millennial Millionaire. However, the caveat with that was twofold. One, they wanted to change the book quite a bit. And I felt that as we were making these edits and changing chapters, adding chapters, that I was losing control of my book, which I did not like. I felt like I had a story I wanted to share that was my own, and I didn't want to sacrifice that. So that was one caveat with the literary agent that you may run into. The other, particularly for nonfiction, excuse me, is 90% of the battle, if not more, is your existing base. Okay. And that's why you'll see all of your news anchors on Fox or CNBC or wherever, they always come out with a book. And it doesn't matter if their book is complete, garbage, but they know that they have an instant following. And those publishers can say, okay, no matter what's even in this book, we know right out the gates because of their platform, we're going to sell 10,000 copies. And that's really where commercial publishers are working from a nonfiction standpoint. And so that's when I spoke with a lot of these literary agents. The first thing they said is, how many Twitter followers do you have? And at the time, because of compliance for my business, we weren't even allowed to have a Twitter account. And I said, all right, it seems like the great metric here is Twitter followers, and I'm not even allowed to go on Twitter. We were running into a number of hurdles there that eventually led me to go to KDP, or at the time it was called CreateSpace, which was owned by Amazon. And that was a great avenue to self-publish, get my work out there. And also, Amazon is the king of the jungle. They were able to distribute it through all of their channels as well. So that it was on Amazon, it was on Kindle, it was in Barnes and Noble, it was at other book retailers as well, even in libraries and such. So all that was done through CreateSpace. Okay. And then I won't belabor the point too much, but even with Anoroc, went through a similar process, actually worked with two publishers, but that wanted to take pretty significant royalties from the book, and also wanted to delay the launch over a year. Which I wasn't totally on board with. So that's where I went to, publish my book through KDP, which was kind of the next evolution of CreateSpace. Okay. So just a little of my experience there. And then perhaps the last thing that we could touch on is marketing the book. And this is where my mentor that I mentioned a moment ago said, It doesn't matter what's between the covers there. It's all about who's going to buy your book. And that was a little bit disheartening, that you feel like you could be the greatest author in the world, but if nobody knows about it and nobody says, oh, you know what, I want to go pick up that person's book, it was all a waste, and you're only going to sell, 5 or 10 copies. So that's where marketing, and I got a rude awakening with this, with Millennial Millionaire out, right out the gates, is that marketing a book launch is critical. All right. And it's not easy either. Fortunately, because of my profession, what I was able to do over time, and a lot of this was through LinkedIn, through reaching out to editors from Forbes, CNBC, Entrepreneur, Success, along with many other big publications, and just reach out regarding my bio as a financial advisor, and now my book, Millennial Millionaire. And a lot of them were open to, some of the thoughts I had. So I would submit an article, and still do, probably about once a week or once every other week, to a lot of these different publications. And then when they run that article on retirement planning or whatever it might be, at the end, I have a byline on there written by Bryan Kuderna, founder of Kuderna Financial Team and author of Millennial Millionaire. And then we put a link to Millennial Millionaire in there. And so there were, articles that were kind of in sync with the young professional market and the theme of the book that went into CNBC. And I could see, as soon as that article was published by CNBC, that about a day or two later, my sales were spiking, very quickly for Millennial Millionaire. So that was a great way for me to start marketing myself and the book at the same time. And then eventually I came out with my podcast, the Kuderna podcast, which is all about business and finance. And all of these things kind of build this brand of sorts that the book is just one piece of, okay? Now for Anoroc, for fiction, we have a totally different story that's not so much based on your network or your base of your target market, but I'd say more on the quality of the book, all right? And for that, I was like, well, where do I turn? How do I let the world know Anoroc exists other than telling people I know? And so one of the best things I was able to do was through Twitter and through some other avenues, is find all these different blogs out there. All right, there's a blog for everything, and for fantasy or different book genres, there's plenty of blogs, podcasts, people that have their own site. And I started, just reaching out to everyone I could find for coming of age fantasy, and said, hey, can I send you a copy of Anoroc? And I'd love for you to review it or talk about it on your blog. And I can give you an author interview and so on. And a lot of people are very receptive to that. And then they would have a blog with 20,000 followers and would say, hey, Anoroc is a story about blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden now you're starting to build some of that base that you want. And so in closing, I'll share a little bit about the new book. One of the reviewers, like I just mentioned, is A Life on Books, which is a blog out of California. They called Anoroc an enthralling young adult fantasy novel, rife with socio-political and coming-of-age themes. And that's exactly what I was going for. And I think that the quote that this gentleman put together kind of encapsulated what I want the book to be known as. And so Anoroc is a 267-page fantasy novel, like I said, about two teenage chickadees. My kids actually came up with the name of the creature here. And our main character is Beaker. And then we tell the story also of his little brother, Dak. And so I'm a diehard Cowboys fan. So that's where, some of the names come from, such as Dak. And then you'll see here, Anoroc will challenge every reader, not just young adults, to rethink good and evil as the twists and turns of each chapter stir emotions only found amidst family, friends, and the innocence of youth. All right, so you could see a lot of real world interactions here, even though we're on this mythical planet. And then from another reviewer, they actually put together suggested book club questions, which was a great idea I hadn't even thought of, but gave me kind of a launch pad to reach out to book clubs and offer my book and offer comments on it and, questions and things that they could use for their club of, pivotal points of the book, some of the characters, some of the different dilemmas in the book and what it all kind of meant to them. And then also one of my beta readers said, the world you've built here is really cool with the three regions of the wetlands, the mountains, and then the plains. And they really liked that, but they said a map would help kind of bring it all together. And so that's where at the very beginning of Anoroc, we have this map that kind of introduces what the planet looks like. And then lastly, of course, you want to stay in touch with your followers and your readers. So I did come up with a website, which I think any aspiring author should do. Usually most author websites are just their name. So if you go to bryankuderna.com, you'll find my website here that talks about my books, the podcast. I have a blog on there, which we talk about writing, fantasy novels, etc. And also I invite other authors to give an interview, and then we post that on our website as well. So that becomes kind of a win-win where now you're co-marketing, you're maybe talking about their story or their accomplishment, but then they're sharing that with their fan base. And that's just getting more eyeballs to your site and also to, of course, your book. So that's a little bit of kind of how I started some of the platform here. And then this is something that I'll share with everybody listening today as well. But I did this for our book launch. Again, with Anoroc, couldn't really do a normal book tour with the quarantine going on. So I did a lot of these talks for everything from Rotary clubs to other colleges to things just like this. And I said, if anybody buys Anoroc and takes a picture of it, with the book and leaves a review, Amazon, Goodreads, any of these places, I'll send you a second copy of Anoroc for free that then they could give to a friend or whoever. So if anyone else out there right now listening, I will continue this offer, goes and buys a copy of Anoroc, definitely take a picture, tag it, hashtag Anoroc. Please leave a review wherever you got it from and let me know about it. You can email us and then I'd be happy to send another copy of the book that you can share with your library or with a friend. Okay. So I know I've been talking for a bit here, but maybe we can introduce or answer some of these questions.
Thanks, Bryan. Yeah, that was great. Thank you. And already questions rolling in, so we'll jump right into that. And the first one I saw before we get too far away from it was a question about the Facebook groups that you joined. If you have any specific names of groups that that you joined that were helpful.
Yep. So I'm a member of a lot of the groups because I like to share, new content or things I've come out with, to as broad an audience as possible. But some that come to mind is aspiring, right? I think it's called Aspiring Writers Unite. So if you just search that one, that was one of them. I know there was Creative Writing was another one. And then I think there's one just called Fiction Authors. So what I did initially is I would just search on Facebook the genre that I want to write about, and then I would see which has the most members. And some have 20,000, 30,000 members, and you knew that you could, it was a pretty active group that you could speak with. But those are three that do come to mind.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
All right, our next question is, once you have a manuscript and start to pass it around, do you need to copyright so that it remains yours? And if so, how to do that?
Yep. Yeah. So that's a great question. So the way that the copyright laws work here in America is that as soon as you put pen to paper and write down that word, it's actually already copyrighted. All right. So as soon as you write your story or your first paragraph, that is your own property that's already protected. Now, what you can do is once you complete the whole manuscript, you could register your copyright with the US Copyright Office. All right. And when you do that, that would just kind of help it stand up in the court of law. If you ever wanted to sue somebody that you said, hey, that story sounds identical to mine, I swear they stole it. And you actually want to lawyer up and take them to court, having registered your copyright can just kind of give you that added level. So you don't have to, but as far as I understand, it's already protected, but you can register it if you want to take that next step.
I couldn't unmute myself there. All right. We have a few questions that are surrounding the idea of how much went into this. And I don't want to put you on the spot, how much in terms monetarily, but we do have a couple questions asking, roughly how much did you spend to create Anoroc, editors, map, cover, etc.? And another similar question, how much is the initial self-investment when self-publishing through Amazon or other platforms? But please only, disclose as much as you're comfortable with.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm an open book, no pun intended. So I'll share everything I can. But so for Anoroc, with my first editor, like I mentioned, was $50. He was a creative writing professor that really just kind of wanted to do it for free. But I just gave him like a $50 tip on Upwork. The professional editor that I used, I believe, was $400. And that was also through Upwork. The illustrator I used for my cover and for the map, I want to say that that was $150, if I'm not mistaken, like 150 or 200. So those were some of the kind of concrete expenses there. But then actually putting that onto KDP, so a lot of that work you do have to kind of do on your own as far as, formatting the book so that it fits their specs, which isn't too tricky, but it does take a little bit of time. And then once you have that all up there, I ordered some drafts, some prints or proofs, I should say, just to see how they looked. But that was really my only startup costs for Anoroc. So all in, if you added all that stuff up, I don't know what that would cost, maybe like $500 or $600 were the startup costs. Then once you enroll with KDP, you're not actually paying like an enrollment fee with them. They're taking a percentage of every single book that's sold, electronic or paperback. So that's where you kind of have like a partner in that sense, where it's not like you have to fill your garage with 1,000 books that you just spent $5,000 on and then hope you sell them. They're what's called print on demand. So that as people are ordering them, they then produce that book and send that out. So it was very efficient in that respect, if that kind of answers the question.
It does, thank you. And someone also asked what the cut, so to speak, of Amazon KDP is what they take. But does that depend? Does that fluctuate?
It does. So it depends on a number of factors with your book, how big your book is, if there's color to it, color cover and so forth, if there's a lot of imagery actually within the book. There's things like that that jack up the costs of producing the book. So I know for Millennial Millionaire, which was very kind of no frills, just a book by itself, there wasn't really anything crazy to the cover or the interior of it. So that book sells for $8 on Amazon. For every paperback sold, I get $2. Okay. So now where that other $6 is, I don't know how much it actually costs to produce it. So if it costs maybe a couple dollars or a few dollars to produce it, then I suppose Amazon gets the other $2 or $3 that's remaining. So that's kind of how that works. The ebook of Millennial Millionaire is $4, and I get $1 for every ebook that's sold. Okay. Now, when it goes through other channels, so let's say somebody goes to Barnes and Noble and they purchase the book. Now my cut is a little bit lower because Amazon's taking their piece, Barnes and Noble is taking their piece, and then there's the production of the book. So as you start to go through other retailers, it kind of waters down that royalty that you're getting. But that's what I'm getting. And on Anoroc, I believe it sells for $11 in paperback. And I don't know offhand what I actually get on that one for the paperback, but I want to say it's around $3.50 or $4.
Great, thank you. Thanks for being so open about that.
Sure. Yeah,
It gives a good perspective for folks who are looking to get into it.
Yeah.
Let's see, when you started working with a literary agent, did you have to sign a contract? And if so, did you have to get out of that to go to KDP?
Yes and yes. So, and this goes back a little bit to the copyright question. So when I wrote Millennial Millionaire, and I was kind of a little paranoid, I didn't know how the whole world of publishing worked. I was afraid people would take some of these ideas or stories. So I actually had people, before they would read it, sign a non-disclosure agreement that they wouldn't start talking about the book everywhere to everybody without my okay. Now, some people signed that and they read the book. Others said, I'm not prepared to sign anything, like go take a hike. And I missed out on people that could have helped perhaps market my book. So be careful of that, because like I said, as soon as you write it, technically it's already copywritten. So you should be protected and shouldn't have to worry. But with the one lady that I did agree to work with, we signed an agreement that she would be my exclusive literary agent. She would be the only one allowed to start marketing and selling it to publishers. So we both signed that, and that obviously there would be a financial incentive for her eventually when we sign a deal, that she'd be getting a portion of any proceeds. So we went through all of that, but then once, like I said, I saw how long the process was going to take and how much they wanted to adapt the book. I eventually said, thanks so much for your work, but I think I'm going to kind of take my book back. And that's where we said, okay, we'll just terminate the agreement. And we both happily went on our way.
All right, great. And here's some more numbers questions in terms of how many copies of your book have you sold, I guess, of each book?
Yep. So of Millennial Millionaire, that number is right around 2,000. So initially that started out pretty slow, like I said, because I wrote it and I'm like, wow, I got this great book. Everybody's going to love it. But then you think, kind of after you've told maybe 100 people of your friends and family, and maybe 10 of them are like, oh, I'll buy Bry's book. After that, like, who even knows that it exists or that you even wrote anything? And that was what my friend Tom had constantly been harping on, is that is like 99% of it is to market. Once I was able to start getting in with, like, Forbes was my first article, and then with CNBC and Business Insider and other places like that, and Newsmax, and become a contributor, then I started to see the sales ramp up. And that's where we got up like around 2,000 or so. And now that's a little bit old, a little stale. So I'll probably come out with a revised or second edition at some point that I think I can market a lot better. But as far as Anoroc, Anoroc now is about 3 months old. And we've sold probably somewhere around 600 copies of Anoroc. And then we'll kind of see where that goes, where again, I'm kind of building from scratch a little that market as well. But there's no time sensitivity to Anoroc. It's not something about business or the economy. It's a true fantasy that even if it doesn't really sell for another 3 years, I don't really care that much. So I'm kind of letting it take on a life of its own. Sure. It's also in a contest right now with Reader's Favorite, which does a lot of big international contests. So if I was to win that, that gives enormous exposure as well.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, good luck.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens.
Do you plan to write any further nonfiction works or a personal memoir?
So yes, I think that Millennial Millionaire did well from two standpoints. One, the message it got out and the sales, but also for my business, it's been invaluable. It's almost like a business card on steroids, I was told. So I definitely want to come up with a second one. This was 5 years ago, so a lot has happened since that I think we can comment on, and make a nice round 2 of that. So that'd be next up. Yep.
All right. Did you have to get written consent for the stories in Millennial Millionaire?
Trying to think. I don't believe so, because there wasn't anything that would have been considered private or that would have been, proprietary. So I did have to footnote a lot of that book when I was quoting different statistics and things of that nature. But there was never like a particular story of, hey, this client, and getting into the real details of it. So there was nothing in that regard that I had to get authorization for.
Okay. And a somewhat similar question that was submitted ahead of time, I shared with you, when working with titles of music, film, poetry, did you have to pay royalties? And I'm not sure that you would have come across that in either of your works, but perhaps you can speak to it.
Yep. So no, I did not. So everything that's in both of my books, I can say is completely original. So there's no chapter title or anything like that I stole from somebody or out of a famous song. But the kind of the good thing in that regard is you are able to use other titles again and again and again. All right. The only time you can't do that is if it's trademarked. And excuse me, usually you will not trademark or be able to trademark a title until it's a series. and it's considered like a grouping of products that you're selling. So for instance, if I have another 3 adaptations of Anoroc, I could have an Anoroc series and I could go trademark that title. But right now, as it stands, I can't. And same with Millennial Millionaire. There was no other one out there. I thought this is such a catchy title. I published it, and within probably 3 months, if you went on Amazon, there were like 6 other Millennial Millionaires. And I was like, you got to be kidding. I thought this was such a good idea. And now people are telling me, which book is yours? Like there's 6 on here. Excuse me. And that was just kind of the nature of the beast. So you just got to look out for trademarks.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
All right, let's see. We have one back to the literary agent. How did you find the literary agent? And once you backed out of the agreement, was any of her time spent getting your book to publishers compensated?
Yep. So the first one, how did I find the literary agent? I don't remember the website offhand, but if you were just to Google, find literary agents for a genre, there's associations that are on there, and I can't remember the name offhand, but I was able to go on there and you can see all these people that are members of that association, and they have their contact info, what their history has been. And so I would solicit them. I just took all of their email addresses and then I pitched them just kind of a synopsis of my book along with, the first chapter. And I'd say, the manuscript is available upon request, but please, check out the gist of my book here. And I would blast that out to, hundreds of literary agents. And that's how I met the lady I was working with for Millennial Millionaire. As far as for her time and the legwork of what she had done, she was not compensated, and that was not in our agreement. That's kind of the nature of the beast for their profession as well, is that they're out there trying to sell something that doesn't exist yet, with the hope that they kind of hit jackpot and then they get their percentage of everything forever. So we never got to that stage with my book.
All right, thank you. Now this may not have a canned one response answer, but what is the appropriate size for a novel, and should there be a set number of chapters? I know you touched on yours is 267 pages. I think you mentioned. I jotted it down.
Yep.
But did and your mentor or agents or anyone you work with kind of have a guide for that, a direction?
Yeah, there actually is a kind of like a unspoken guide for the lengths of these things. So a novel is typically going to be like 240 to 300 pages. So the rule of thumb is if you're over 60,000 words, you have a novel. Okay. I think Anoroc is somewhere around like 65,000, I want to say. Once you go over 100,000 words, they consider that an epic, which is like a different type of book. So those are huge books, like Lord of the Rings or something would be like an epic. So you have your epics, you have your novels. And then if you're under like 50,000 words, usually 10,000 to 40,000 words is called a novella, which is kind of like in the whole publishing space. That's like a different subset of a book. So usually just think like 55,000 words and up is when you have an actual novel.
That's great. Okay, well, I learned something there too. All right, let's see. What social media platforms have you found are worth running ads for selling books?
Yep, that's a very good question. And it's something that I'm always trying to learn and improve on myself. So I think Facebook is good. You can run very pinpointed ads as far as like regions, demographics, people that you want to see your ad. So I've done Facebook a good bit and I have seen some traction on that. But then I've run Facebook ads that I've put out for 5 days that I spend $100 on just to see, and it doesn't get anything at all. So those are a little bit tricky sometimes to tell when it works or doesn't, but you can get very fine-tuned in your target market. So I think Facebook is great for that. I haven't really used Instagram at all. I'm not too familiar with their advertising. And I've used Amazon's advertising as well, which is good because you pay per click. So you could say, all right, I'll spend $25 a day to advertise. But if nobody clicked on your link that day, you pay $0. So everybody likes Amazon in that respect, but it's much harder to get seen. It's harder to get your book to be popping up, with all the other ones of consider this one.
Sure.
But those are the ones I've used: is Facebook and Amazon. I worked with PR Web, which was really good for a press release. And then they send that out to pretty much everywhere you could think of. So that as soon as we did that on the opening week of Anoroc, it was in, probably, I would say like 30 big publications. And you could see how many clicks you got. That cost maybe $400. That was with PR Web. So that also was a good way to advertise too. But
Awesome.
everything's on Twitter. I don't know how you advertise really on Twitter, but and back to the literary agent question, two places I've gotten a lot of traction: Twitter and LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, you can search for editors or reviewers within your genre, add all those people, and then immediately you have their email address. And so once you have their email, that's when you can reach out and say, hey, could you take a look at my book? I'd love to get your thoughts. And that's where LinkedIn and Twitter, I was able to track a lot of people too.
All right. What did you think of the quality of printing through Amazon?
Yep. So I have no qualms with it whatsoever. I think it looks, if you just look here at Anoroc, the cover and everything and the pages, I think it looks just like a normal book. So I think they've been great.
I can attest to that. I happened to order the book for my niece, and so it came to my house before I wrapped it for her birthday. And yeah, the quality was just as good as anywhere else.
Yep. Thank you.
Let's see. Did you take any courses or read any books on fiction writing, such as character development, timeline, structure, etc.?
I probably should have, but I did not. So now, really, I think the best way to become a good fiction writer is to read a lot of fiction. And the more and more that you read, some of the great authors, you're naturally going to pick up some of their style, some of their narrative, and some of the way they structure a story or a book. And then you can kind of incorporate a little bit of that to whatever you're trying to do with your book. So I would say that is the best teacher, is just reading other books out there.
Sure, great.
I did Google some things on like how the guy that did Game of Thrones, he's put out a lot of articles and tips on writing. So I read a lot of that stuff, and that did give me some ideas for some of the world building. And that, from reviewers, have been some of the best compliments I've gotten, is that the world building of Anoroc they really like that, like all the details and the imagination in that. So.
Okay, let's see. I think we are still getting questions. This is definitely our most Q&A we've had, so that's kind of exciting.
Cool.
For self-publishing, what is the very next step that you would take after you have completed your manuscript fully edited? Would you now work on formatting with Amazon, purchase an ISBN, copyright? ?
Yep. Yeah. So if you go through Amazon, they kind of do all of that for you. So you have your manuscript, you have your cover and your cover art and all that stuff all good to go. Then you'll go sign up on Amazon with KDP, and they give you all the specs. So if you want your book to be 6 inches by 9 inches or whatever size you prefer, and then they'll tell you the specs of that. So you go back to Word or wherever to format that. And then I was able to have my illustrator do all of it for me. I just forwarded him everything and he did it all for me. And then you upload all of that onto KDP. They assign you your ISBN number as well as an ASIN number for the electronic version. So they kind of do all that for you. And like I said, it already technically is a copyright. All right. So if you look at the front of my book here, let me see if I can just kind of show you. So in there we have, I've put in the copyright as well. Copyright 2020, by Bryan Kuderna, all rights reserved, et cetera, et cetera. So you get that naturally for any written work, but that's up to you if you want to go register it with the U.S. Copyright Office, just to do that kind of next step.
Okay, great. Right, let's see. Someone asked if you could explain exactly what KDP is, what the letters mean, and how to contact KDP.
So I believe it's Kindle Direct Publishing, but don't quote me on that. And if you just go to Amazon or Google KDP Amazon, it'll take you right there. And then you could sign up on there. And then you get what they call your bookshelf, which is pretty much like your portal that you go to start creating everything you want about your book. So it's not like you actually contact someone there. That's just Amazon. And so right now, I don't know what the statistic is, but it's a very small percentage of books are commercially published. And usually they're long-standing authors, your J.K. Rowling, Stephen King's, people like that. And then the other like 90% of the literary world today is going through KDP. So KDP is enormous in the self-publishing market, is kind of like the king of the jungle right now.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting question. Are literary agents able to give advice on issues involving nonfiction where names have been changed to protect identities? In other words, if someone recognizes your name as the author and sees a chapter in a book about them, even if the name, place, business, etc., has been changed, can they still come after you as the writer?
That was a long question. I'm trying to make sure I understand it.
I think they're asking if you were to write something about a personal instance, even if you change the names of the people involved.
Yeah.
If I recognize myself in your book, could I come after you for writing about me, even if my name was changed?
And I would imagine the answer to that is yes. I'm not an attorney, so I don't want to give any legal commentary on that. But I assume if you're kind of providing their likeness enough that someone could identify and say, oh, of course, they're talking about Joe Smith over there, then I think that you could certainly be on the hook if you have not spoken to that person and gotten their permission. So I would say you got to be kind of careful about that.
Is that something the literary agent could step in and help you with?
Yeah, I'm sure if you're working
beyond their realm.
Yeah, I mean, a literary agent, I'm sure, is probably more familiar with what's okay, what's not okay. And then ultimately it would be with that publisher. So if they team you up with XYZ publisher, then they also are kind of on the hook as well with you. So like with my book that was business oriented and that did have more concrete info, I put in there, my own disclosure that I do just for like all my business correspondence that's in the back of the book. And I mentioned in there that any errors or quote unquote misrepresentations are the fault of my own as the author alone. That it's not, that if I misrepresented a study or something, that was my error. But again, I went through it with a fine tooth comb. I had to go through my whole compliance office. So that's where the nonfiction book, I think, was pretty well vetted.
Great. Okay. All right. And let's see, we're getting down to it. Have you found that there are particular times of year that you would spend more on advertising, such as summer reading, Read Across America Week, or December with holidays? Have you found an uptick where you might put money towards advertising?
Yep. That's a good question. I haven't, put any kind of really scientific thought behind that in my kind of getting the word out there. Anoroc came out in November of last year. So that was right in time for the holidays. So for instance, like the Facebook ads and some of the overall book launch, I, marketed that as like, if you have a child or a grandchild or someone that's in that teen demographic, consider this a great Christmas gift, blah, blah, blah. So I did do that, but that's a great point for summer reading and getting in some of the book clubs that, maybe in the next couple months I'll look into.
You can report back.
I will, yeah.
All right. Well, I think we'll let you off the hook here. You had a ton of questions, so thank you for answering all of them and being so open to do so. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. And I would just say, everybody go out, definitely check that out. My latest work, Anoroc. I'll give you a little hint. The only reason I was able to finish this one was because of the pandemic and shutting our offices down. So you will see Anoroc is actually Corona backwards. And that's definitely for a memorable year.
Yeah, for sure.
There's a lot of little hidden Easter eggs in the book that other people could find too.
Cool. This webinar will be recorded for those of you who want to go back and dig through all of the great information that Bryan shared with us. You'll be able to do so probably by the end of the week. It'll be on our TCNJ alumni site /webinars. And feel free to email me with any follow-up questions. And Bryan already shared a couple of ways you can get in touch with him. And again, thank you. This was really chock full of a lot of information that I think, as we can tell from the questions, a lot of people really found value in. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, everyone, take care and stay safe. Thanks again.